Coming up tonight on Locked On Texas Tech, post-game edition, we're talking 63-10 Tech over Murray State to open up the season. But first, we're not talking the final score. You know what we're talking about. Next on Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're going to start this thing off right. Raider!
Glad to be back with you on Locked On Texas Tech. Appreciate you for joining us whenever, however, you're dialing us up. Subscribe on YouTube, anywhere you get your podcasts for the daily episodes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. I'm Casey Cowan, joined by Chris Level, who was just on the sideline call for Texas Tech and Murray State. Good news, 63-10. No problem for the Red Raiders as far as the final score goes. But, Chris, obviously the conversation is going to center around the status of QB1, as unfortunately it was a traumatic flashback, something seemingly similar to what we saw last season for Tyler Shuck as he leaves game one early.
Yeah, Casey, it was a situation, I think, on that it was that run converted a third down, and he immediately came up, and if you were watching, he kind of immediately reached under his shoulder pad, and you could just tell, and it looked, unfortunately, identical to what I saw in Austin last year. The next pass he throws is about 3 or 4 yards high, and that's when you're not real sure, okay, I don't feel something's, right, and do I put too much on it? Do I take enough off of it? It just something doesn't feel right, and next thing I know, he's walking by me, and he is going up the tunnel, and they would take him across the field back to basically the main headquarters. That's where they do X-rays and everything. That's my assumption. But on a sling, or in a sling, in the second half, and on the sideline, and just Coach McGuire's told me, hey, look, we're gonna X-ray it. I think they already have done that, but we'll get an update to everybody in a day or two. But when he says to me, hey, the good news is it's September, it's not, and so it's not October. So that tells you that, this may be something that it may not be good, I guess is my point. It just sucks. It kind of sucks the fun out of a big night like this for sure.
Man, there's no question. And I know I, as a fan, and I know that you're a broadcaster and you serve in an official capacity on the radio broadcast and here on Locked On Texas Tech, but you began this because you were a fan as well. And we like to root for Red Raiders, and we like to root for guys that are easy to root for as Red Raiders, and that's Tyler Shuck. And so I think we all felt the same kind of gut punch, deflating, take the air out of the balloon kind of feeling. I don't know what it is, because clearly the guy's capable as a football player, but the personal story, I think, is what so many beyond football had really tuned into. And, you're rooting for the guy and hoping for the best as far as the timeline. But I think we all understand what was kind of visible and some of the flashbacks, as I already mentioned, as to what the previous injury involved.
If it's not good news, your heart breaks for him, because this is all he has done and worked towards since that game in Austin last year. And, it just looked all too, familiar. And they had said all off season, and I don't want to dampen this thing. I mean, you still got a whole season to go and all that, but
Sure.
It's just almost like trying to be respectful here to, I don't want to bury the lead. I know that's what most people are going to think about, because here's the other thing. You had 3 quarterbacks throw touchdown passes. I'm not sure that's ever happened before in a game around here. I asked Joey McGuire about that. He's like, I didn't even think about that, but that's what happened. But, they had talked all off season. Hey, look, we're not going to try to necessarily protect these guys, because we've got some depth. We're gonna call plays, and we're gonna run them, and we're gonna do some things that just like, you got to be kidding me that the first run that you call for a QB, he just gets tackled, and then that was it. It's just like, I mean, seriously, man. I mean,
Yeah.
It's just not fair. If indeed it's bad news, my eyes tell me, body language tells me, and watching him interact on the sideline and kind of, hey, we'll get you an update here in the month of October mentioned by Coach McGuire. I'm just assuming that it may not be good news at all. But
Right.
Donovan looked great, Casey, and Barron looked really good. And so you see some of that depth, but you may be about to get into it a little bit.
Seems like that's a certainty, and wishing Tyler the best with whatever he's got coming up. And I think if you have any opportunity to spend any time around him whatsoever, you understand that there is some maturity to Tyler Shuck that'll give him the best opportunity to deal with whatever is to come. But obviously hoping for the best there. If we can pivot to football, as I mentioned, you're roaming the sidelines for the Texas Tech radio broadcast every week, Chris, and man, I'm curious about the vibe there when that comes across on that Texas Tech sideline. What did you feel, and who were some of the Red Raiders that were the rallying points to kind of keep the minds focused where they needed to be when that went on?
Well, I would tell you the vibe down there is a lot different than it's ever been, and I'll tell you why. They had these monster speakers on the sideline, like right next to the stands, and it's pumping in whatever noise is going over the speakers on the video board. It is bone rattling.
Thumping.
So we were in the club for 4 hours. Yes. And I'm not joking to you when I tell you it will rattle you. It'll vibrate everything. I mean, the whole deal. And so that creates a different environment down there, because especially when you play a game like you did tonight, when there's so many highlights and it's so fun and you're just wearing the other team out, but it creates a different level of energy. But to name some guys, Casey, I would tell you Jaron Bradley and Lubbock were really impressive at wideout. I think what you Taj Brooks had 3 touchdowns in the first half. Roderick did his thing. I thought you got to the quarterback a bunch. Philip Liddy did his thing. Tyree Wilson made some noise. You get some sacks and everything. But 600 yards of offense, and you gave up a few. I think Coach McGuire was a little bit flustered at the end of the first half when we were walking up the tunnel with his corners, and their eyes being in the wrong place. They gave up some chunk plays. I think there was 124 yards on just 2 plays that accounted for just 2 plays in the first half. That if you take those out, then maybe the numbers don't look as bad. But yeah, there's the stat sheet right there if you want to take a look at it. But it was just a good night. I thought I tell you too, the fact that we didn't really call Miles Price's name a ton, and you still have a monster night on offense, I thought was pretty darn impressive. I think that's a good thing for you. And you emptied your bench. I mean, there's some guys that recorded tackles and caught balls and things like that to the end that Drew Hookup was one, and I didn't come into tonight to expect to see him playing, and Sam Carroll, number 99. I'm like, okay, who is this young man? But he had a sack, I think, toward the end of the game.
Well, you never know what any of it's going to translate into when you get into real competition. And hey, by the way, that's a week away with the top 25 opponent in the next 2 weeks for Texas Tech prior to Big 12 play. But I was glad to see, if it wasn't going to be Miles Price, going back to some of what was happening offensively, if it wasn't going to be Miles Price, I was thrilled to see Bradley and Fungi take the lead statistically as far as the passing game was concerned, Chris, because I feel like those are guys that Zach Kitley and Joey McGuire need to really be dudes, because physically they look the part. I think athletically they've got that type of capability or potential, but it's the next step of putting it together consistently to be a Big 12 wide receiver, and maybe one that's looking like an all-conference kind of wide receiver. I was glad to see them really, at least as much as the opportunities provided, fill up the stat sheet here tonight.
Yeah, and how about, speaking of just offense in general, how about a flea flicker for the first play from scrimmage on your own 5-yard line? I mean, that is freaking awesome, man. I mean, you got to be kidding me. And whether he knew he was going to do that ahead of time, but if you did, and you're like, okay, we'll do it if something crazy doesn't happen, but down in a punt on your own 5-yard line or trying to return it, and then you still call it anyway, I love me some Zach Kitley for sure, man. That's some serious huevos there.
There's no question about it. And hey, while you're getting started on potentially this early Sunday morning, I don't know what time you're taking in Locked On Texas Tech postgame edition, but maybe those huevos rancheros are just about done. Glad to have you with us alongside your breakfast here as we're taking in a first Sunday potentially of the college football season. And you want to talk about huevos, marvels. Talk Donovan Smith. Donovan Smith was a guy we knew was going to be on the field. Talked about different packages and situations. Well, how about this situation? QB1 is gone, and we're about, a cup of coffee, as you like to say, into the regular season. And he comes out, Chris, and it's like the rhythm is there from the beginning, it seemed.
He's really good, I think. I just don't think he played particularly as well or as consistent as Tyler Shuck did through the offseason. Hence that Shuck wins the job. But there's nothing. Donovan just, he's got some experience to now draw from. I think that, we'll see what this looks like if he indeed starts versus Houston. That's going to be absolutely my expectation until somebody tells me otherwise. But, yeah, and I'll tell you what, we didn't really see Donovan run much. That wasn't really a part of anything he was doing tonight. It was mainly just drop back and throw it. And I think that's the kind of fun thing, because the scariest part of his game is when he cuts it loose and runs and scrambles and all that. I will be interested, Casey, to see if Shuck is gone for a period of time. Does Zach feel comfortable enough like running these guys as much like called stuff, just because, okay, we have three now maybe not, then you just don't want to. But Donovan's a big kid. He's 6'6" or about 6'5", 240. So I don't know, but he was really good tonight, to your point.
Yeah, I thought a lot of guts were on display there, because while you're the backup quarterback, and certainly he knows as well as any backup quarterback that your name can be called at any time. While that's all there in mind, you're not thinking while the going band's still getting settled into their seats that your name is about to be called. Game 1 against Murray State. So credit to Donovan Smith for being ready to go, and credit to some of those around him for putting him in a position to be ready to make some big plays, which we saw here tonight. Chris, I want to get to the trenches on both sides of the ball, but let's stick with the O here while we're there. What'd you see from the offensive line tonight?
Yeah, they gave their guys plenty of time to really throw the ball down the field. That's the one thing I talked to Joey about after the game, was they really stretched the field, and I think it credit to the offensive line. And they weren't sure they were going to get those looks, just because a lot of times Murray State would really drop coverage and really keep everything in front of them. But there was a lot of one-on-one situations that I think Zach was able to take advantage of with some play calls. And I thought the offensive line, we didn't call them their names much, but I mean, credit to Dennis Wilburn and those five guys, and Caleb Rogers played well. Weston Wright, I mean, I thought they did a good job. They were just consistent, and we really didn't talk about them a whole lot in a good way. Right. So I think kudos to those guys. And now next week a little bit different, but we'll worry about that when we get there.
Are we still watching a right tackle spot, a right guard spot, or anywhere that a little competition is playing out? Are some starters entrenched? How do you think these early games are working out in the view of Stephen Hamby in that regard?
I didn't see anything different tonight that would alter, what they had come into the game with. But again, I'm not, grading it and all that. They'll look at it, but I mean, we'll get an update on that next week. But a game like tonight allows you to just empty your bench. So many of those guys, got to play, and you got to experiment a little bit and all that stuff. So that part's good.
What about the other side of the ball for Tim DeRuyter, game 1 as Texas Tech defensive coordinator? And while you expect in these matchups to light some things up offensively, Chris, we've learned that defensively it's not a guarantee that you're going to keep statistically the other team in a box. But we saw that, I think, to a certain degree tonight.
Yeah, and I would tell you that I thought that really the end of the first half was the key drive, and that they keep Murray State off the scoreboard, and because their quarterback DJ Williams, I think there's an ankle issue with him, and I think he didn't ever return. I don't know if that's going to be necessarily very good at all either for them. But their starting running back went out. But the bottom line is that defensive stop, I think, to hold Murray State off the scoreboard. And they could have kicked the field goal, probably would have made it. But the fact that you gave up no points right there, I thought that was a really good credit to those guys. There is a few chunk plays you want to get back, and you lost some receivers, that got behind you, and that's the one negative there. But I thought you stopped the run for the most part. I thought you got after the quarterback for the most part. No issues other than some of those chunk plays, and that's something that Joey talked about at the end of the first half, and we talked about after the game with him as well. So got to keep working on that for sure. And Fry left. That's also a negative. He didn't finish the game. Don't know. I think Coach McGuire thigh contusion, so I don't know what that looks like. But that you may miss him for a bit. But he also indicated you'd get Robert Wooten and Bryce Ramirez and a data ray is set to. All those guys are set to be able to play and be back next week. So,
Chris, I want to turn our attention to next week before we wrap it up here. I mean, what kind of uptick are the Red Raiders really in for? Because opening weekend can be kind of funky regardless of competition. You hear about the week 1 to week 2 jump for every team in the nation, and Texas Tech will be one coming off of an FCS matchup when they take on what was a preseason top 25 team in Houston here in Lubbock coming up next week.
An older team, an experienced team, probably a motivated team. They remember what happened to them last year. Now, you're kind of hoping that UTSA and the Cougs would play 8 overtimes, and are still playing even. But I think, 3 overtimes, and Houston finally squeaked it out. But what a heartbreaking loss for UTSA in front of a big crowd there at the Alamo Dome. But, yeah, Houston will be salty. They're going to have athletes everywhere. Again, they're going to be motivated. Dana's coached here before. He knows what environment they're getting into. And, it'll be a major upgrade as far as competition goes. And Donovan will have to play well. And, you're going to have to create some turnovers, I think. And you didn't – that was one thing that you didn't – Barron threw that one interception, but no takeaways tonight. So the take 3 thing will be fully on display quite a bit this week. And you'll need them against teams like NC State and Houston. I watch NC State quite a bit as well today against East Carolina, and they barely squeaked out of there with a win too. So, your next 2 games are going to be interesting. They're going to tell us a lot. You could win them both. You could lose them both. I don't think we'd be surprised by any of the results in the next 2 weeks.
Well, and I think you always got to caution yourself as a fan about reading too much into a week 1 result either way. If you're a Houston fan, a Texas Tech fan, or anyone in between, you can really see quite a difference, good or bad, from week 1 to week 2. You don't know the kind of personality that's going to show up in that next game. And you know what? I kind of think Texas Tech might have a little bit of a back against the wall personality, just in the sense that a QB1 goes down and, hey, immediately plan A is questioned. Plan A is in doubt. Do you have what it takes to still be successful if it is a worst case scenario? These things are all discussed now. And I think there's a little pressure clearly early on in this season that was not some of that already accounted for pressure as far as, hey, new coach trying to have a better year, yada, 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 the stuff that comes with it, the crab bisque, et cetera, when you're heading into a season like this. You got a little different storyline now rolling into week 2. But, man, excited for the opportunity, Chris, because we're going to find out, right? You gauge yourself against somebody like this. You're going to find out very early on what you are or what you aren't. I'm curious, did you feel like Texas Tech was a physical football team tonight? Did you feel like it was something that translated from some of the better parts of what we saw last year? What was the general type of feel on the field? Because there are few to no views that are like what you get on Saturdays.
Yeah, no, they were physical. I thought, big and deep, and I don't think there's any doubt. There's some playmakers up front, and they tried to address that as we've talked about. So, no issue there. I thought Tyree Wilson, I thought Miles Cole was impressive at times. So, no issue there.
Well, there you have it, 63-10, Texas Tech over Murray State. A comfortable win for the Red Raiders in week 1, but you move on in an uncomfortable way with QB1 now sideline, and we turn again to Donovan Smith to see if he's the man with the plan as we roll on for another home date, but one this time now with the top 25 opponent in Houston. We'll have it all covered for you all week long on Locked On Texas Tech. Subscribe on YouTube or anywhere you get your podcasts. We'll see you next time around. For Chris Level, I'm Casey Cowan. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Locked On Texas Tech.